Addressing the terrible tragedies that happen in the childhood of heroes is a very popular technique often used in anime. Eren witnesses the death of his mother. Naruto becomes a victim of society's hatred for reasons unknown to him. Such situations usually allow authors to create motivations for their heroes and get rid of some conventions. But what if we look at situations where childhood traumas are depicted in a more grounded way, where the hero has to seriously work to sort out their skeletons in the closet, where it has a detrimental effect on their psychological health, and where it is one of the key themes of the work? I'm Lex Silver, and today we'll talk about the psychological traumas of anime heroes. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to not miss new videos. And if you want to buy me a coffee, the link is in the description. The psychological health of a person and psychology are very interesting and complex topics, so I won't delve into diagnoses today. Videos with diagnoses are available on the channel. However, there are some topics for discussion that I would really like to touch on, such as childhood trauma. First, I would like to address the phenomenon of bullying in the cruel world of school children. I don't dress the right way, I don't talk the right way, I don't behave the right way, I'm too smart, and so on. So many rules have to be followed in order not to look strange in the eyes of other children. And even if a child follows all the laws of the jungle, he or she can still become an outcast by making just one mistake. This is a serious problem that has hardly bypassed at least one person. In childhood, it is much more obvious and significant. In rare exceptions, the child remains neutral to the bullying of other children. He or she is either the aggressor, the victim, or a bystander who is afraid to take the side of the victim. In the rarest case is those who try to defend the humiliated children. Is it worth discussing the fact that children often behave more cruelly than adults, due to their desire to assert themselves and not fully realizing the consequences and weight of their actions? They can inflict irreparable childhood trauma on their classmates. For the whole world, and especially for the Japanese, this is a very serious problem. It is all about the peculiarities of mentality and the influence of national and cultural norms. That is why in works of literature, such topics often surface, albeit briefly. The fear of becoming an outcast in society is a very popular problem for Japanese youth. For example, in the work A Silent Voice, we are shown how difficult it is for a child with special needs to adapt in the society of other children. I have a lot of criticisms of the anime adaptations, but mostly they're about time constraints, which can leave some characters' motivations unclear and introduce characters that will then be forgotten, but that's not the point. The anime adaptation does a good job, as we can closely watch how the deaf girl Nishimiya Shoko initially attracts a lot of attention due to her differences, but soon the children, having played enough caring friends, realize that being a good companion for a child with disabilities it's not so easy, and all their friendliness ends pretty quickly. They begin to ignore the girl, stop trying to break down the communication barrier between them and the heroine, and soon make her the object of bullying. Nishimiya herself, apparently faced with this not for the first time, tries her best to understand her peers and remains friendly and polite, since at this age it is especially important to have people close to you next to you. But that's not where the story ends, and when the fact of the girl's bullying is revealed to the adults, the main character, Shoya Ishida, becomes the scapegoat. And it's not that he's necessarily a bad person, of course his actions are disgusting and stupid, but Shoya is also a child who, as I mentioned before, doesn't fully comprehend the consequences and does it not out of direct hatred towards Nishimiya, but rather out of a reluctance to understand her and to remain the center of attention in his group. But after his bullying is exposed, his loyal friends, not wanting to share in the weight of the consequences of their childish pranks, disown him, convincing themselves that they did nothing wrong in comparison to him. Of course, it's much easier to avoid punishment and condemnation in this way, and it immediately becomes clear that Shoya is not such a good friend after all. But all of this leads to irreversible consequences for him. Already realizing his own guilt, the hero is subjected to public condemnation and bullying. This leads to him developing disgust and hatred towards the society that rejected him. But how can this be, if everyone is equally to blame and he becomes the outcast? Naturally, this leads to isolation and self-hatred. He begins to think that maybe he really is terrible, consumed by feelings of guilt. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be loved, to be part of society, to just exist. It gets to the point where the hero plans to end his life. And if in this story the hero comes to his senses and decides to confront his problems and start fighting them, in real life things may not turn out that way. A more grim development of such events can be observed in the work The Priority of the Magic Egg. In this work, we are told about girls who, in their childhood, experienced such difficult life circumstances that sometimes even adults are unable to endure. Each of them has their own serious problems that weigh them down. At the same time, they repeatedly enter into a so-called dream world, where they must protect their peers from their phobias and fears. The girls say goodbye to life in the real world, each for different reasons. Some could not withstand bullying, others faced harassment, and others felt disappointed and considered themselves unnecessary in this world. In one of the stories, we even hear about two fangirls of a popular musician. And when he leaves this life, they follow him. And although it sounds absurd and silly, they are trying to show us, albeit in a very exaggerated way, that this problem really exists and is very important. After Kurt Cobain's departure from life, many fans stepped out of an open window. At this age, people can really become so engrossed in a particular interest or become a victim of opinion leaders that it turns into a whole manic addiction. So much so that neither family, nor other hobbies and joys of life, nor life itself will be as important. But the heroines themselves are not without their problems and fears. For example, the main heroine Ai Oto became a victim of bullying because of heterochromia, the different coloration of the iris of the right and left eye, or the different coloring of different areas of the iris of one eye. Rika Kawaii gained popularity at a young age but later lost it, which she finds hard to accept. Additionally, her mother clearly cannot or does not want to fulfill her role and properly take care of her daughter. On the other hand, Nairu Aonuma became a victim of her family's inflated expectations, resulting in an unbearable burden of responsibility on her. It is important to note that they are not fighting for the sake of it. The girls were given a hint that theoretically, by saving girls from their dreams, they could bring back to life their deceased loved ones who also took their own lives. But more importantly, they themselves begin to understand the value of their own lives, to reconcile and try to cope with their own problems and difficulties. This anime is simply overflowing with a huge number of teenage problems and ideas about how insignificant they all are compared to the value of life. Bullying is not the only problem mentioned in the works. How about situations where a person becomes a victim of abduction, or their loved ones are abducted? This is what is told to us in the works The Town Where Only I Am Missing and Ghost Hunt. The City Where I Am Not reveals the first theme to us from the right angle. Trying to save his classmate in the past, the protagonist noticed many details that he simply could not understand at that age. His classmate is kidnapped, yes, she was not his friend, but still. The number of victims is growing, and his comrade becomes the main suspect and subsequently convicted. Children are asked to be extremely careful, not to go anywhere alone. They are waiting for exhausting conversations with the police, the deaths of comrades who are killed in quite sophisticated ways. It is worth noting, attempts by parents to protect them, including their mental health, trying their best to cover up the situation, hoping that the children will simply forget everything. Oh, and besides that, the question of harsh treatment of children is perfectly revealed there. We are shown how a girl gets used to, if you can put it that way, her abuser in the role of a mother, moreover, defends her, refusing to acknowledge the fact of violence, suffers clearly unhealthy abuse that goes beyond simple violence for educational purposes. This is a victim of violence by the mother with truly manic and psychopathic tendencies. As a result of all this, little Ko simply does not know how to be a part of society, and any social ties are difficult for her to establish. And how surprised she is afterwards by simple human things, home-cooked meals, good friends, the loving mother of the protagonist. I don't know about you, but for me, this story arc became so heavy, so oppressive, offensive, and vivid that I became terribly uncomfortable and lonely. Being a victim of abduction, especially in childhood, is difficult to imagine. It is even harder to try to estimate how hard it is for you afterwards. It is difficult to go outside, not to see a potential abuser in people, and to realize that it is all over. Something similar is shown in the work Ghost Hunt. Let me briefly introduce you to the plot. There is a main character. In his early childhood, he and his sister were abducted by an unknown person. He contacts the parents hoping to make an exchange and release the children in exchange for a ransom. All this time they were in an abandoned village nearby. But something unexpected happens. the parents contact the police, and on the day they try to make a deal, the police attempt to arrest the kidnapper. By chance, while trying to escape from the police, he is hit by a car and dies instantly. It turns out that no one, except the deceased, knew the whereabouts of the children, and their search took a long time. As a result, the older sister of the protagonist dies of starvation, and little Taro is forced to watch it. This undoubtedly created a huge amount of psychological trauma for the protagonist, being abducted, witnessing the painful death of his own sister, and still being around her corpse for some time and expecting the same fate, is truly terrifying. As a result of all of this, the protagonist develops narcolepsy, a neurological disorder that falls under the category of hypersomnias. It is characterized by daytime episodes of uncontrollable sleepiness and sudden sleep attacks, cataplexy episodes, sudden loss of muscle tone while remaining conscious, disturbances in nighttime sleep, the appearance of hypnagogic while falling asleep, and hypnopompic, upon awakening, hallucinations. Sometimes, there is a brief period of paralysis of the body immediately after awakening, as well as paranoia and unhealthy anxiety. Furthermore, infinite nightmares are superimposed on this narcolepsy, repeating the events of those terrible days in a distorted form. Taro is constantly seeing a psychologist, and even at home, he cannot fully feel at peace, as the tragic events also affected the main character's mother. In this way, inadvertently reminding her of what happened risks exacerbating her condition. Throughout the dialogues with the psychologist, we ourselves become acquainted with some ways of coping with similar problems, as well as step-by-step uncovering the nuances of Taro's illnesses in his past. I almost forgot, but there are 3 heroes, and the other 2 are not exactly shining examples of mental health either. Makoto lives in a family that has founded their own religion. His grandmother Himiko practices various curses and hexes, earning money by causing harm and suffering to others. His father committed suicide for an unknown reason, suspected by many to be related to a kidnapping. And his mother abandoned him. In fact, there are many more difficult moments in Makoto's life, but revealing them would be serious spoilers. And if you think I've already told you a lot, oh no, I've only scratched the surface. The third character, Masayuki, seems to be the most normal, slightly pushy, and with psychological issues, he's afraid of heights. Is that all, you might say? But this phobia arose not just out of nowhere, but became a consequence of witnessing a teenager jumping off a roof, which he claims was his fault. In general, everyone has skeletons in the closet. Oh, and all these themes are complemented by a huge number of excellent surrealistic inserts and fantastic sound design, radio interference, muffled sounds, as if we're underwater, and tons of just superb effects. By the way, these same interferences are inserted appropriately and from an ideological point of view. It turns out that such sounds can provoke an exacerbation of narcolepsy. I love this attention to detail to the point of horror. I'll say again that I've only described a small part of the anime, and I highly recommend watching it for yourself. In this video, I cannot talk about all the fears, phobias, and complexes of all the anime characters. Please write in the comments which anime or character you would like to see a similar video about. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.